Okay, hi guys. So welcome to my week 3 reflection for the AUD 457 assessment. And what I'm going to be talking about today is my work in progress for my genre that I've actually chosen to analyze and study for the purpose of the assessment, and that is basically Future House. So as you can see on the top left hand side, I've set my tempo up to 128 BPM. And the reason for this, as I had discussed in my week 2 proposal and scope, is basically because for the reference tracks that I had found through my research, a lot of those tracks were actually produced at the same tempo as well. So that was the given tempo that I'd set this particular session. So what I want to talk about specifically is how I've actually set up the drum instruments or programmed the drum instruments and achieved the tonal balance of each. But to start off, I'll talk about how I've actually programmed the group to give you a bit of background. And you can sort of see in the first section of drums here, there's a kick, there's two claps, a clap for the mid layer, a clap for the top layer, and I'll talk about the difference between the both in a moment. And there's an open hi-hat as well. So the kick is basically placed on every single beat, the clap on every single second beat, and there's a open hi-hat that's placed on every single offbeat. So what I'll talk about first is how I achieved the tonal balance for the kick drum in this particular loop. So if I take a look at the kick channel, and you can sort of see there's an EQ which I've set up there. Excuse me. Let's expand this so you can see this a bit more clearly, and I'll also make sure to solo the instrument as well. You can sort of see the EQ that I made two EQ decisions. One, which is a reduction using a Bell EQ at 45 Hz, and the other, which is a slight boost at 10 kHz by 1 dB. So I'll first talk about the first EQ decision here at 45 Hz with the Bell EQ, where I've made a small reduction by 1.5 dB. So originally what I thought with this particular sample is that it contained quite a bit of low-end thump or sub-bass, I guess it's another way you can sort of put it, but it sort of sounded a bit too overpowering for this type of genre of music. So I had used this EQ type to basically make a small reduction here to give it a bit more of a balance overall in terms of the instrument tone. So if I solo this EQ band, so you can sort of hear the region that I'm talking about. So hopefully that's coming through the recording. And if you could hear that, there is quite, I guess that particular region there is focused on the boom or the punch of the sample itself. So originally it was a bit overpowering. So I decided to actually make a slight reduction there by 1.5 dB to give it a bit more balance. And then more interesting enough is what I've actually done using the third EQ band up here where my mouse is hovering, and there's a boost there at 10 kilohertz, so that make a boost there by about 1 dB. So if I solo this particular region, what you're sort of hearing there is some type of click tonality to the sample, and through some of the research that I'd found, when it comes to sort of enhancing the clarity or the presence of kick drums, especially in electronic music, or more specifically this genre, which is Future House, one of the common methods used is to actually boost the frequencies where that click in the kick can be heard just by a marginal amount. So that way the overall presence of the kick is sort of enhanced in the mix. All right, so that was the first instrument that I had sort of shaped in terms of its tonal balance. The next section I'll talk about is the claps. So as you can see, there's two clap sounds in my session here. So if I solo the first clap, it's very focused on the mids. I guess you could say it's a main body clap sound. And then the second layer, which is labeled as the top layer, it's a bit more focused on the higher frequencies. Okay, so I'll just explain the difference between the two. So with the first clap sound, which is focused in the mid layer, basically I'd use an EQ firstly to low cut everything beneath 300 hertz because it wasn't really needed for this particular sample. And then I made a boost here right about 932 hertz. So if I solo this region, just so you can hear what I boosted, mainly focus on the mids. Sort of wanted to give that a bit more weight to the sound itself, especially with the reference tracks that I'd analyzed. And then following that, I'd used an EQ to sort of, not an EQ, sorry, I used a compressor to sort of further shape the transient of the sample itself. Moving on to the second clap layer, which is a bit more interesting in my opinion. I'll first talk about the EQ there. You can sort of see there's a low cut using this EQ 300 hertz because all that frequency information is unnecessary in this particular sound. And then I made quite a substantial reduction using a Bell EQ at 2300 hertz by minus 5.5 dB. And this is because I've made a boost in this region in the previous clap sample already. So I didn't want the two to actually clash or compete for frequency space. And next in the chain here, I've got a device set up called the Simple Delay. And the effect that I've spoken about in my reflection was something called the Haas effect. So the Haas effect is a type of method or technique where we can independently delay, I guess, the left and the right sides by individual time intervals. As you can see here, I've delayed the left by 50 milliseconds and the right by 10 milliseconds, and the effect more or less is a type of stereo enhancement. So if I actually turn off this device, you can hear the original clap sound, and if I turn it back on, hopefully in the recording, what you can sort of hear is this particular clap sound now having more presence in the left and right side of the stereo field. And that was the sort of effect that I had heard in the tracks that I analyzed for the purpose of this particular project. So the next sound that I have here is an open hi-hat. And with the open hi-hat, there's an EQ. I low-cutted everything below 400 hertz, and I made a slight dip at about 12,200 hertz. And if I solo this region to show you why. So this particular frequency region is very focused on the brightness of the sample itself. And originally it was a bit too overpowering, and I wanted this to sound a bit more balanced between the clap samples and the kicks. I made a slight reduction there just so that it sounded more balanced overall with the rest of the drums. Cool. So looking at the second section that I have in my session here, you can see there's two other layers that I've used in the programming of my drums. One, which is a shaker loop that I programmed in MIDI, then recorded to audio. I'll let you hear that on solo. And then there's a reverse hi-hat loop here, which I also recorded to audio, which is originally in MIDI. I'll let you hear that as well. I really used these two layers here just to sort of, give some progression to the arrangement of the drums, especially once I've sort of programmed the bass instruments for this particular assessment or project. So if you take a look at how I've actually shaped the tonality of both of these sounds, firstly the shakers, the simple EQ, low cut beneath 800 hertz, and then with the hi-hat loop, another low cut, as you can see there, just everything beneath 300 hertz. So there wasn't really much happening here. I just wanted to make sure that both of these two sounds weren't competing with the kick drum in the loop itself. Cool. So the last part I'll talk about here is the effects that you might be hearing in the background in terms of, added ambience or echo on these samples. So what I'm essentially talking about here is the use of reverb. So I've actually got a reverb set up on one of my return channels, and I've got that to affect via the sends my clap instruments, the open hi-hat, the shakers, and the hi-hat loop. So if I just open that up real quickly for you to sort of see what it looks like. So what I'm using here is one of my favorite reverbs. It's called the Lexicon PSP reverb. It's a whole whole preset, and I set the decay time or the reverb time to about 2.8 seconds. So if I just demonstrate that on the claps, I'll turn that off, the reverb, turn it back on, just to give a bit more of a room sound or ambience to those samples. And again, a typical technique that I sort of analyzed in the reference tracks that I had listened to prior to commencing this part of the work. And if you listen to the open hi-hat, you can also sort of hear the reverb being used there as well. And the shakers, reverb off, and then the hi-hat loop. Just minimize that. So how everything sounds together, I'll play back both of the sections side by side. All right, that's it, and I'll check back with you soon.